All right, today we're jumping into a really fascinating and frankly pretty concerning article. It takes a hard look at the military campaign known as Operation Epic Fury and asks a simple question: why do the reasons for it keep changing? So, the article kicks things off with this old saying from the courtroom. And honestly, it frames this whole thing perfectly. The idea is simple, right? If you're a witness and you keep changing your story, well, the changing itself becomes the real testimony. The argument here is that a government that's sure about why it went to war doesn't need a bunch of different explanations. The changing story is the real story. And that right there is the central question we're digging into. So, what is the real story behind Operation Epic Fury? Well, the article tries to unravel this mystery by looking at the official reasons given, stacking them up against the actual intelligence, and just examining the whole context. So, let's start with those official reasons. Okay, so first up, let's look at what the article calls the carousel of justifications. And that's a great way to put it, because according to the source, these weren't reasons that followed one after the other. Nope. It was more like a rotating list of excuses ready to be rolled out whenever the last one started to look a little shaky. And when you look at what was on this carousel, wow, it's the sheer variety that's just wild. The article points out that the reasons jumped all over the place. One minute it's about stopping a nuclear program that was supposedly already obliterated. The next it's about acting before an ally could. Then it's a humanitarian mission. Then, get this, it's payback for election interference. The article's point is that these reasons aren't just all over the map. Sometimes they flat out contradict each other. And this is where the article really drops the hammer on this point. It basically says, look, when you have a war that's supposedly justified by everything, in the world of law and evidence, that might just mean it's justified by nothing. It's a moving target. And that raises a huge question, right? If the public story is this messy, what was the actual intelligence saying behind the scenes? Which brings us to our next section. This is where the source material does something really powerful. It puts the public claims right next to what the intelligence community was actually assessing. And let's just say the difference is pretty revealing. Okay, first up, the nuclear threat. The public was being told that Iran was actively rebuilding a functional weapon. But the source says that intelligence assessments painted a very different picture. They called the program significantly degraded and found zero evidence of an actual functional weapon being built. All right then, you have the missile threat. The claim was that missiles could reach the U.S. homeland soon, but the article points to a Defense Intelligence Agency report that said, well, maybe by 2035, at the absolute earliest. So we're talking a massive gap between the word soon and the actual intelligence assessment. And this really gets to the heart of the imminent threat claim. Publicly, the story was that Iran was about to launch a preemptive strike. But according to the source, when officials went behind closed doors to brief Congress, they admitted there was no specific intelligence backing that up. This massive gap between what was said in public and what was said in private, that's a huge part of the article's entire case. So, if you thought the gap between the claims and the intel was weird, hold on. The article then gets into something it calls the FBI paradox. And this part of the story is, well, it's just plain bizarre. I mean, just look at this sequence of events. First, just days before the war, the president is talking about an imminent assassination threat right here on U.S. soil. Then, a mere 48 hours before the bombs start dropping, the FBI director completely guts CI-12, the one elite unit whose entire purpose was to track that exact kind of threat. It makes no sense. Which leads to the article's really pointed question here. If the threat was so real and so imminent, why on earth would you dismantle the one team designed to stop it? The source puts it perfectly. You don't turn off your radar right before an air raid. It really only leaves you with two possibilities, right? Either the threat was real, and this was an act of incredible incompetence, or the threat wasn't what they said it was. Okay, so moving beyond the intelligence and the strategy, the article brings up two other really critical angles we have to consider. First, the human cost, the actual undeniable tragedy of this war. And second, the theological ideas that were apparently motivating some of the key people in charge. And this isn't some abstract concept. The human cost is very, very real. The source we're looking at cites reports confirming that on just the fourth day of the operation, at least 108 children died at a single elementary school. Now, the article is very careful to stick only to what is known for a fact. We know a girls' school was destroyed. We know it was near a military target. What we don't know for sure is who fired the weapon. It could have been an errant missile from the US or an ally, or it could have been a failed Iranian air defense missile. The perpetrator is unconfirmed. So this is where the article brings in another very different layer to all of this. It's a theological idea called dominionism. And, put simply, it's the belief that society, government, the military, everything should be governed by biblical law, all to advance the dominion of Christ. So, why is this relevant to a military operation? Well, here's why. The article lays out a direct connection. The Secretary of Defense's personal mentor is a man named Douglas Wilson, who is a leading dominionist pastor. And this pastor was a featured guest at a Pentagon prayer service just 11 days before the war kicked off. The source also mentions internal communications where the Iran campaign was apparently being called a holy mission. All of this suggests that maybe, just maybe, there was more than just geopolitical strategy at play here. And the article really brings the point about the human cost home with this quote. It says, "It is established fact that the United States launched a war in which these children died and cannot tell the world with certainty that they did not." That's a powerful statement. It says that no matter who fired that specific missile, the U.S. started the conflict, and it can't wash its hands of responsibility. So after all of this, the changing stories, the conflicting intelligence, the human cost, where do we end up? Well, the article argues this is way bigger than just bad PR or a military mistake. It frames this whole thing as a genuine, full-blown constitutional crisis. And the argument is pretty fundamental. It goes right back to Article I, Section 8 of the Constitution. You know, the founders were terrified of one person having the power to start a war. That's why they specifically gave the power to declare war to Congress, not the president. The article's claim is that this situation is the exact nightmare scenario the founders tried to design the Constitution to prevent. So based on that constitutional argument, the source doesn't just analyze the problem. It proposes some serious remedies. It calls on Congress to take action on 3 fronts, all at once. Invoke the 25th Amendment, start impeachment proceedings, and use its power of the purse to force an immediate ceasefire and a truly independent investigation. And that leads us to the final, really provocative question the article leaves hanging in the air. It asks, does this republic still have the will to function the way the founders designed it to, especially when it's facing the exact kind of test they built it for? And that's not just about this one war, is it? It's about whether the whole system of checks and balances can still work when it matters most. A heavy question for sure, and one the source argues we all have to face.